Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Page 408. Thus, there came to be in most every tournament with an initial draw of 64, a group of 3 boys, then 4, and by the semifinals, 5. Then, finally, 6 boys, who for that tournament formed the Clipperton Brigade. Players who'd had the misfortune to draw and meet Eric Clipperton and Clipperton's well-oiled Glock 17, and who understandably declined to be the player to cause Clipperton to eliminate his own map for keeps in public for something as comparatively cheesy as a tournament win over Clipperton. A win over Clipperton had no meaning because a loss to Clipperton had no meaning and didn't hurt anybody's regional and USTA ranking. Not once. The guys in the USTA Computer Center caught on to the Clipperton strategic MO. Thus, an early exit from a tournament because of a loss to Clipperton came to be regarded as a sort of like a walk in baseball, stats-wise. And a boy who found himself in the Clipperton Brigade and defaulted his round tended to view that tournament as a kind of unexpected vacation. A chance to rest and heal, to finally get some sun on the chest and ankles, to work on chinks in his game's armor, to reflect a little on what it all might mean. Clipperton's first meaningless victory ever came at 16, unseeded, at the Hartford Junior Open, first round, against one Ross Riat of Maddox, Ohio, and the just-opened Enfield Tennis Academy. For some reason, it struck who sort of specializes in this story and never misses a chance to tell new ETAs the tale of Clipperton versus Riat. Clipperton's an okay player, nothing spectacular, but also not like absurdly out of place at a regional grade tourney, but Riat is at 15, seasoned and high-ranked, and the 3rd seed at Hartford. And Riat is for a while, as would be SOP of a high seed in the first round, basically cleaning under his nails with this unseeded, unknown Eric Clipperton. At 1-4 in the second set, Clipperton sits down at the side change and instead of toweling off, reaches into his gear bag and extracts his classy little blonde wood case and gets out the Glock 17. Fondles it, takes out the clip and hefts it, and rams it home in its slot at the base of the grip with a chillingly solid-sounding click. Caresses his left temple with the thing's blunt, shiny barrel. Everybody watching the match agrees. It is one ugly and old business-looking piece of personal defense hardware. Clipperton climbs up the rungs of the lifeguardish chair. The umpire in his blue blazer sits in and uses the umpire's mic to make public his intention of blowing his personal brains out all over the court with the hideous Glock should he lose. The small first-round gallery stiffens and inhales and doesn't exhale for a long time. Riat audibly gulps. Riat is tall, densely freckled, a good kid, one of Incandenza's fair-haired boys, not too bright, with the satellite tour so clearly in his future that at only 15 he's already starting cholera shots and mastering third-world exchange rates. And but for the remainder of the match, which lasts exactly 11 more games, Clipperton plays tennis with the Glock 17, held steadily to his left temple. The gun makes tossing kind of a hassle on Clipperton's serve, but Riat is letting the serves go by untouched anyway. None of the ETA staff has bothered to show up and coach Riat through what was supposed to be a standard first-round fingernail cleaning. And so Riyadh is strategically and emotionally all alone out there. And he's opted for not even pretending to make an effort. Ross Riyadh was the first and last junior player ever to shake Clipperton's free hand at the end of a match. And the moment's captured in a Hartford Courant staff photo that some ETA wiseacre later glued to the door of Struck's room, with so much Elmer's all over the back that taking it off would gut the varnish, so the thing stays up for all time in the hall to see. Riyadh, here up at net, on one knee, one arm over his eyes, the other hand extended upward, to a Clipperton who'd simply obliterated him psychologically. And Ross Riyadh was never quite exactly the same player again after that. Both Stitt and De Lind have assured all future potentially mercy-minded ETA males. And the legend story goes, Eric Clipperton never henceforth loses. No one's willing to beat him and risk going through life with the sight of the Glock going off on his conscience. Nobody ever knows where Clipperton comes from to play. Never seen at airports or interstate exit ramps, or even spotted carb loading at any Denny's between matches. He just starts materializing, always alone, at increasingly high-level junior tournaments, appears on draw sheets with Ind by his name, plays competitive tennis with a Glock at his left temple, and his opponents, unwilling to sacrifice Clipperton's hostage, Clipperton Mem, barely even try, or else they go for impossible angles and spins, or else talk on mobile phones while they play, or try to hit every ball between their legs or behind their backs. And the match's galleries tend to boo Clipperton just as much as they dare. And Clipperton sits and hefts his 17-shot clip and takes the brass-jacketed 9mm cartridges out sometimes and clicks a few together ruminatively in his hand in the sideline chair at all the odd game breaks. And sometimes he tries little Western gunslinger trigger guard spins during the breaks. But when play resumes, Clipperton's deadly serious once more and has the Glock 17 at his tempo playing, and mows through the lackadaisical Clipperton brigade round by round and wins the whole tournament by what is essentially psychic default, and then, after collecting his trophy, vanishes like the ground itself inhaled him. His only even remote friend on the junior tour is 8-year-old Mario Incandenza, whom Clipperton meets because even though Disney Leith and an early protector named Cantrell are shepherding the male tournament contingent, including a solid but sort of plateau stock and no longer much improving 17-year-old Oren Incandenza. That summer, ETA headmaster Dr. J.O. Incandenza shows up at quite a few of the events on the domestic circuit, doing under ostensible USTA auspices a 2-part documentary on junior competitive tennis, stress, and light. And so, Mario's trotting around with lens cases and Tuffy tripods, etc., at most of that late summer's meaningful events, and meets Clipperton, and finds Clipperton intriguing, and in ways he can't be very articulate about, hilarious, and is kind to him, and seeks out his company. Clipperton's, or, at any rate, at least treats Clipperton like he exists. Whereas by late July, everybody else's attitude toward Clipperton reassembled that kind of stiffly conspicuous non-recognition that E.g. accompanies farts at formal functions. One of himself's short test cartridges, shot to check out transverse aberration at various sun angles, the case's little adhesive sticker says, contains the only available footage of the late Eric Clipperton. From the preponderance of salt tablet dispensers and littered pledge husks and Dade County ambulances, it was pretty likely shot at the hideous Sunkist Junior Invitational Cramp Fest in August in Miami. Just a couple overexposed meters of Clipperton, head down and hunched, on a low orange bleacher, bony-shouldered and no shirt and untied Nikes, his Gothic scripted case in his lap, his elbows on his knees, and his hands spidered across both cheeks, staring down between his feet and trying not to smile, as a withered, toddler-sized, and forward-listing Mario stands beside him, supported by his portable police lock, holding a light meter and something else too helated to make out on the tape, open very wide for a homodontic laugh at something funny Clipperton has apparently just let slip. Hal, having smoked cannabis on 4 separate occasions, twice with others, on this continental day of rest, plus still in a kind of guiltily sickening stomach-pit shock from the afternoon's estreton debacle and his failure to intervene or even get up out of his patio chair, Hal has lost a bit of his grip and has just gotten on the outside of his 4th chocolate cannoli in half an hour, and is feeling the icy electric keening of some sort of incipient carry in the left molar range. And also now, as usual, after swinishness with sugar, finds himself shaking emotionally into a kind of distracted funk. The puppet film is reminiscent enough of the late himself that just about the only more depressing thing to pay attention to or think about would be advertising and the repercussions of the ONANide reconfiguration for the U.S. advertising industry. Mario's film executes some rather over-arty flash cuts between the erections of loose site fortifications and the ATHSCME and the EWD displacement installations along the New U.S. border, on the one hand, and the shadowily implied Rodney Tyne disastrous love interest element with the voluptuous puppet representing the infamous and enigmatic Quebecoise fatale known publicly only as Luria P. On the other, Tyne's puppet Tiny Brown Felt Han is on Luria's voluptuously padded little popsicle knee. In the famous Vienna, Virginia Szechuan steakhouse, where, according to dark legend, subsidized time was conceived on the back of a chintzy Chinese zodiac paper placemat by R. Tyne. Hal happens to know the fall and rise of millennial U.S. advertising exceptionally well, because one of the only 2 academic things he's ever written about anything, even remotely filmic, was a mammoth research paper on the tangled fates of broadcast television and the American ad industry. This was the final and grade-determining project in Mr. U. Ogilvy's year-long Intro to Entertainment Studies in May of YPW, and Hal, a 7th grader and only up to R in the condensed OED, wrote about TV advertising's demise with a reverent tone that sounded like the events had taken place at the misty remove of glaciers and guys in pelts instead of just 4 years prior, more or less overlapping with the waxing of the gentle era and experialist reconfiguration Mario's puppet show makes fun of. There's no question that the network television industry, meaning since PBS is a whole different kettle, the big 3 plus the fast-starting but low-endurance Fox, had already been in serious trouble. Between the exponential proliferation of cable channels, the rise of the total viewer control handheld remotes known historically as zappers, and VCR recording advances that use subtle volume and hysterical pitch sensors to edit most commercials out of any program taped. Here a rather chatty digression on legal battles between networks and VCR manufacturers over the edit function that Mr. O drew a big, red, yawning skull next to in the margin out of impatience. The networks were having problems drawing the kind of audiences they needed to justify the ad rates their huge overhead slavering maw demanded. The Big Four's arch foe was America's 100-plus regional and national cable networks, which, in the premillennial Limbaugh era of the extraordinarily generous Justice Department, interpretation of the Sherman statutes had coalesced into a fractious but potent trade association under the stewardship of TCI's Malone, TBS's Turner, and a shadowy Alberton figure who owned the view out the simulated window of various lavish homes in exotic locales channel, the Yuletide Fireplace channel, the CBC cable's educational programming matrix, and four of Le Groupe Videotron's 5 big Canadian shop-at-home networks, mounting an aggressive hearts and minds campaign that derided the passivity of hundreds of millions of viewers forced to choose nightly between only 4 statistically pussified network broadcasters, then extolled the empoweringly American choice of 500 plus esoteric cable options. The American Council of Disseminators of Cable was attacking the 4 right at the ideological root, the psychic matrix where viewers had been conditioned rather deliciously by the Big Four networks and their advertisers themselves, Hal notes, to associate the freedom to choose and the right to be entertained with all that was U.S. and true. The AC/DC campaign, brilliantly orchestrated by Boston, Massachusetts, Viney and Veal's advertising, was pommeling the Big Four in the fiscal thorax with its ubiquitous anti-passivity slogan, "Don't sit still for anything less." When a wholly unintended coup de grace to network viability was delivered in the form of an unrelated Viney and Veal's side venture. V&V, like most U.S. ad agencies, greedily buttered its bread on every conceivable side when it could, and started taking advantage of the plummeting Big Four advertising rates to launch effective network ad campaigns for products and services that wouldn't previously have been able to afford national image proliferation. For the obscure local Nunhagen aspirin company of Framingham, Massachusetts, Viney and Veal's got the Enfield-based National Craniofacial Pain Foundation to sponsor a huge touring exhibition of paintings by artists with crippling craniofacial pain, about crippling craniofacial pain. The resultant network Nunhagen ads were simply silent 30-second shots of some of the exhibits with Nunhagen aspirin and soothing pale pastels at lower left. The paintings themselves were excruciating, the more so because consumer HGTV had arrived, at least in the very upscale Incandenza home. The ads, with the more dental pain-type paintings Hal doesn't even want to think back on. What with a fragment of cannoli wedged somewhere upper left, he keeps looking around for Stott to ask him to have an angle-mirrored look at. One he can recall was of an ordinary middle-class American guy's regular face but with a tornado coming out of the right eye socket and a mouth at the vortex of that tornado, screaming. And that was a mild one. The ads cost next to nothing to produce. Nunhagen aspirin sales went nationally roofward, even as rating figures for the Nunhagen ads themselves went from low to abysmal. People found the paintings so excruciating that they were buying the product but recoiling from the ads. Now, you'd think this wouldn't matter so long as the product itself was selling so well. This fact that millions of national viewers were zapping or surfing to a different channel with their remotes the moment a silent, painted, twisted face with a hatchet in its forehead came on. But what made the Nunhagen ads sort of fatally powerful was that they also compromised the ratings figures for the ads that followed them, and for the programs that enclosed the ads, and worse, were disastrous because they were so violently unpleasing to look at that they awakened from their spectorial slumbers literally millions of network devotees who'd hitherto been so numbed and pacified they usually hadn't bothered to expend the thumb muscle energy required to zap or surf away from anything on the screen. Awakened legions of these sudden violently repelled and disturbed viewers to the power and agency their thumbs actually afforded them. Viney and Veal's next broadcast cash cow a lurid series of spots for a national string of walk-in liposuction clinics reinforced the V&V trend of high product sales but dreadful ad ratings. And here the Big Four were really put on the spot, because even though the critics and the PTAs and eating disorder-oriented distaff PACs were denouncing the Lipovac spots, shots of rippling cellulite and explicit clips of procedures that resembled crosses between hyperbolic Hoover upright demonstrations and filmed autopsies, and cholesterol-conscious cooking shows that involved a great deal of chicken fat drainage, and even though audiences' flights from the Lipovac spots themselves were absolutely gutting ratings for the other ads and the shows around them, network execs' sweaty sleep infected with vivid REM visions of flaccid, atrophied thumbs coming twitchily to life over remote zap and surf controls, even though the spots were again fatally potent. The Lipovac string's revenues were so obscenely enhanced by the ads that Lipovac Unlimited could soon afford to pay obscene sums for 30-second network spots, truly obscene, sums the besieged four now needed in the very worst way. And so, the Lipovac ads ran and ran, and much currency changed hands, and overall network ratings began to slump, as if punctured with something blunt. From a historical perspective, it's easy to accuse the network corporations of being greedy and short-sighted, with reference to explicit liposuction, but, Hal argued, with a compassion Mr. Ogilvy found surprising in a 7th grader, that it's impossibly hard to be restrained and farsighted when you're fighting against a malignant, invasive V&V-backed cable cabal for your very fiscal life day to day. In hindsight, though, the Big Four spinal camel straw had to have been V&V's trio of deep-focused black and white spots for a tiny Wisconsin cooperative film that showed tongue scrapers by prepaid mail. These ads just clearly crossed some kind of psycho-aesthetic line, regardless of the fact that they single-handedly created a national tongue scraper industry and put Fond du Lac's No Coat Incorporated on the Fortune 500. Stylistically reminiscent of those murderous mouthwash deodorant and dandruff shampoo scenarios that had an anti-hero's chance encounter with a gorgeous desire object ending in repulsion and shame because of an easily correctable hygiene deficiency, the no-coat spot's chilling emotional force could be located in the exaggerated hideousness of the near geologic layer of gray-white material coating the tongues of the otherwise handsome pedestrian who accepts a gorgeous meter maid's coquettish invitation to have a bit of a lick of the ice cream cone she's just bought from an avuncular sidewalk vendor. The lingering close-up on an extended tongue that must be seen to be believed coat-wise. The slow-motion full frontal shot of the maid's face going slack with disgust as she recoils, the returned cone falling unfelt from her repulsion-paralyzed fingers, the nightmarish slow-mo with which the mortified pedestrian reels away into the street traffic with his whole arm over his mouth, the avuncular vendor's kindly face now hateful and writhing as he hurls hygienic invectives. These ads shook viewers to the existential core, apparently. It was partly a matter of plain old taste. Ad critics argued that no-coat spots were equivalent to like Preparation H filming a Procto exam, or dependent undergarment camera panning for floor puddles at a church social, but Hal's paper located the level at which the Big Four's audiences reacted here, as a way closer to the soul than mere tastelessness can get. V&V's no-coat campaign was a case study in the eschatology of emotional appeals. It towered, a kind of Uber ad, casting a shaggy shadow back across a whole century of broadcast persuasion. It did what all ads are supposed to do, create an anxiety relievable by purchase. It just did it way more well than wisely, given the vulnerable psyche of an increasingly hygiene-conscious USA in those times. The no-coat campaign had 3 major consequences. The first was that horrible year Hal vaguely recalls when a nation became obsessed with the state of its tongue, when people would no longer leave home without a tongue scraper and an emergency backup tongue scraper that they'd failed to wash and brush and spray. The year when the sink and mirror areas of public restrooms were such grim places to be. The no-coat co-op folks traded in their bagash overalls and hand-woven ponchos for Armani and Dior, then quickly disintegrated into various 8-figure litigations. But by this time, everybody from Procter & Gamble to Tom's of Maine had its own brand's scraper out, some of them with Baroque and potentially hazardous electronic extras. The second consequence was that the Big Four broadcast networks finally just plain fell off the shelf, fiscally speaking. Riding a crest of public disaffection, not seen since the days Jif commercials had strangers shoving their shiny noses in your open jar, the Malone, Turner, and shadowy Albertan-led cable cabal got sponsors whose ads had been running as distant as 7 or 8 spots on either side of the no-coat gaggers to jump ship to AC/DC US broadcast TV's true angels of death. Malone and Turner then immediately parlayed this fresh injection of sponsorial capital into unrefusable bids for the rights to the NCAA Final Four, the Major League Baseball World Series, Wimbledon, and the Pro Bowlers Tour, at which point the Big Four suffered further defections from Schick and Gillette on one side, and Miller and Bud on the other. Fox filed for Channel 11 protections Monday after AC/DC's coup announcements, and the Dow turned grisly indeed on GE, Paramount, Disney, etc. Within days, 3 out of the Big Four networks had ceased broadcasting operations, and ABC had to fall back on old Happy Days marathons of such relentless duration that bomb threats began to be received both by the network and by poor old Henry Winkler, now hairless and sugar-addicted to La Honda, California, and seriously considering giving that lurid but hope-provoking lipovac procedure a try. But the ironic third consequence was that almost all the large, slick advertising agencies with substantial network billings, among these, the Icarian, Viney, and Veals, went down too, in the Big Four's maelstrom, taking with them countless production companies, graphic artists, account execs, computer enhancement technicians, ruddy-tongued product spokespersons, horn-rimmed demographers, etc., the millions of citizens in areas for one reason or another, not cable available, ran their VCRs into meltdown, got homicidally tired of Happy Days, and then began to find themselves with vast, maddening blocks of utterly choiceless and unentertaining time. And domestic crime rates, as well as out-and-out suicides, topped out at figures that cast a serious pall over the penultimate year of the millennium. But these consequences' own consequence, with all the Yankee ingenious irony that attends true resurrections, comes with the now combined Big Four, muted and unseen now, but with its remaining creditor-proof assets now supporting only those rapaciously clever executive minds that can survive the cuts down to a skeleton of a skeleton staff, rises from the dust heap, and has a collective last hurrah, ironically deploying V&V's old pro-choice anti-passivity appeal to obliterate the AC/DC that has just months before obliterated the Big Four, bringing TCI's Malone down on a golden bell-shaped chute and sending TBS's Turner into self-imposed nautical exile. because enter one Noreen Lassay-Fauché, the USC-educated video rental mogulette, who, in the BS 90s, had taken Phoenix's intermission video chain from the middle of the Sunbelt pack to a national distribution second only to Blockbuster Entertainment in gross receipts. The woman called by Microsoft's Gates the killer app queen, and by Blockbuster's Huizenga the only woman I personally fear. Convincing the rapacious skeletal remains of the Big Four to consolidate its combined production, distribution, and capital resources behind a front company she had incorporated and idling ever since she'd first foreseen broadcast apocalypse in the Nunhagen ads psycho-fiscal fallout. The front, an obscure-sounding concern called Interlace Tel Entertainment. Les Fauché then went and persuaded Ad Maestro P. Tom Veals, at that time mourning his remorse-tortured partner's half-gainer, off the Tobin Bridge, by drinking himself toward pancreatitis in a Beacon Hill brownstone to regather himself and orchestrate a profound national dissatisfaction with the passivity involved even in DSS-based cable watching. What matter whether your choices are 4 or 104 or 504? Veal's campaign argued. Because here you were, assuming of course you were even cable-ready or dish-equipped, and able to afford monthly fees that applied no matter what you chose each month. Here you were, sitting here, accepting only what was pumped by distant AC/DC fiat into your entertainment ken. Here you were, consoling yourself about your dependence and passivity with rapid-fire zapping and surfing that were started to be suspected to cause certain rather nasty types of epilepsy over the longish term. The cable cabal's promise of empowerment, the campaign argued, was still just the invitation to choose which of 504 visual spoon feedings you'd sit there and open wide for. And so, but what if, their campaign's appeal basically ran, what if, instead of sitting still for choosing the least of 504 infantile evils, the Vox and Digitus Populi could choose to make its home entertainment literally and essentially adult? What if, according to Interlace, what if a viewer could more or less 100% choose what's on at any given time? Choose and rent over PC and modem and fiber optic line from tens of thousands of second-run films, documentaries, the occasional sport, old beloved non-Happy Day programs, wholly new programs, cultural stuff, and see all prepared by the time-tested, newly lean Big Four's mammoth vaults and production facilities, and packaged and disseminated by Interlace Tel Entertainment. Inconvenient, fiber optic pulses that fit directly on the new palm-sized 4.8 MB PC diskettes Interlace was marketing as cartridges, viewable right there on your trusty PC's high-resolution monitor, or, if you preferred and so chose, jackable into a good old premillennial widescreen TV with, at most, a coaxial or two. Self-selected programming, chargeable on any major card, or on a special low finance charge. Interlace account available to any of the 76% of U.S. households possessed of PC, phone line, and verifiable credit. What if Veal's spokeswoman ruminated aloud? What if the viewer could become her own programming director? And what if she could define the very entertainment happiness it was her right to pursue? The rest, for Hal, is recent history. By the time not only second-run Hollywood releases, but a good many first-run films, plus new sitcoms and crime dramas and near-live sports, plus now also big-name anchor nightly newscasts, weather, art, health, and financial analysis cartridges were available and pulsing nicely onto cartridges everywhere. The ranks of the AC/DC's own solvent program pumpers had been winnowed back to the old movie and afternoon baseball major metro regional systems of more like the BS 80s. Passive pickings were slim now. American mass entertainment became inherent, proactive, consumer-driven. And because advertisements were now out of the television question, any halfway sensitive PowerPC's CPU could edit out anything shrill or ungratifying in the post-receipt review function of an entertainment diskette. Cartridge production, meaning by now both the satellitic spontaneous dissemination of viewer-selected menu programming and the factory recording of programming on packaged 9.6 MB diskettes, available cheap and playable on any CD-ROM-equipped system. Yes, cartridge production, though tentacularly controlled by an interlace that had been patented, the digital transmission process for moving images and held more stock than any one of the 5 baby bells involved in the internet fiber optic transmission grid, bought for 17 cents on the dollar from GTE after Sprint went belly up trying to launch a primitively naked early mask and tableauless form of videophony, became almost Hobbesian free market. No more network reluctance to make a program too entertaining for fear its commercials would pale in comparison. The more pleasing a given cartridge was, the more orders there were for it from viewers. And the more orders for a given cartridge, the more interlace kicked back to whatever production facility they'd acquired it from. Simple. Personal pleasure and gross revenue looked at last to lie along the same demand curve, at least as far as home entertainment went. And Interlace's eventual outright purchase of the network's production talent and facilities of 2 major home computer conglomerates, of the cutting-edge Frox 2100 CD-ROM licenses, of Apps Inc., of RCA's DSS orbiters and hardware patents, and of the digital-compatible patents to the still needing to come down in price a little technology of HGTV's visually enhanced color monitor with microprocessed circuitry and more lines of optical resolution, as these acquisitions allowed Noreen Lace Forcher's cartridge dissemination network to achieve vertical integration and economies of scale. Viewers' pulses reception and cartridge fees went down markedly, and then the further increased revenues from consequent increases in order and rental volume were plowed presciently back into more fiber optic intergrid cable laying, into outright purchase of 3 of the 5 baby bells internet started with, into extremely attractive rebate offers on special new Interlace Ace designed RISC grade high-def screen PCs with mimetic resolution cartridge view motherboards, recognizably renamed by the Veals boys in recognition teleputers or TPs, into fiber-only modems, and of course, into extremely high-quality entertainments that viewers would freely desire to choose even more. But there could be no ads of any kind in the interlace pulses of ROM cartridges, was the point Hal's presentation kept struggling to return to. And so then, besides e.g. a Turner who kept litigating bitterly via shortwave radio from his equatorial yacht, the true loser in the shift from AC/DC cable to interlace grid, was an American advertising industry already reeling from the death of broadcast's Big Four. No significant markets seemed in any hurry to open up and compensate for the capping of TV's old gusher. Agencies reduced to skeletal cells of their best and most rapacious creative minds cast wildly about for new pulses to finger and niches to fill. Billboards sprouted with near mycological fury alongside even rural two-laners. No bus, train, trolley, or hack went unfestooned with high-gloss ads. Commercial airliners began for a while to trail those terse translucent ad banners usually reserved for Piper Cubs over football games and July beaches. Magazines, already endangered by HD video equivalents, got so full of those infuriating little fallout ad cards that fourth-class postal rates ballooned, making the email of their video equivalents that much more attractive. In another vicious spiral, Chicago's once vaunted Sickingen, Smith, and Lundin went so far as to get Ford to start painting little domestic product come-ons on their new line's side panels, an idea that fizzled as U.S. customers in Nike t-shirts and Marlboro caps perversely refused to invest in cars that sold out. In contrast to just about the whole rest of the industry, a certain partnerless Metro Boston ad agency was doing so well that it was more out of ennui and a sense of unlikely challenge that P. Tom Veals consented to manage PR for the fringe candidacy of a former crooner and schmaltz mogul, who went around swinging a mic and ranting about literally clean streets and creatively refocused blame and rocketing people's waste into the forgiving chill of infinite space.